Now, the way that we tend to speak about truth and knowledge in the contemporary world tends to be very influenced by Kant in a lot of ways. And I think misses the relationality between the objects of knowledge and the knower, which is just a deeply relational process or thing in general. And so the way that we tend to think about truth is that we speak about what's called a correspondence theory of truth, talking about bare facts, okay? To have right knowledge or knowledge of the truth, then, is to have an intellectual apprehension of certain facts that are consistent with reality. Okay, so there's a correspondence between the claim that one is making and the actual thing that it's referring to. So it might be something like a historical event. The truth in an event, might be that, this battle was, fought on this day and then ended in this way. And those are, verifiable statements when you say something like that. And you could judge that statement on the basis of various historical documents that testify to when that battle was fought and what happened at that battle and whatever it was. And so having true knowledge then would be having an acknowledgement intellectually or an intellectual apprehension of the facts about that battle that correspond to the actual events. Now, of course, that's not untrue. So I'm not arguing for some kind of approach to truth which says that isn't truth. Those are true statements. But that's not all that truth is, and that's not all that knowledge entails. Because when we're speaking about truth, if it is the case that God is truth, because he is, or truth is that which aligns with God and his nature and his providential dealings in the world. And so if God is the truth and God also is love, that means that there is this connectivity between truth and love. So that which is the most true is also the most loving, because love is the ultimate reality. And if truth is that which aligns with reality, then truth is also love, and love is also truth. So it's not bare and abstract when we're talking about truth. There are questions related to, well, what does that mean about, affirming the historicity of horrific events, right? You could have a terrible event in history, and you may say that, well, it's true that it happened. So, of course, there is one sense in which, yes, you can speak about that as true, in that it is an event that happened. But there is another sense in which horrific events, though true in a factual, particular historical sense, also diverge from truth, because they are attempts to live in untruth against the one who is truth himself. We have to keep both of these elements of knowledge or truth in mind. So what that means is that true knowledge then is not just the bare affirmation of the facts, but true knowledge is that encounter with truth, and that encounter with truth is an encounter with God, who is the truth. We have this unfortunate divorce in the way that we view the world between subject and object. We are subjects. We have a sense of self. And when we view the world around us, we have around us a world of objects, a world of things. And there are different ways that we can relate to a world of objects. There are different ways that we can relate to the things around us, or view the things around us, or approach the things around us. And a lot of this depends upon your worldview. It depends upon the way in which you see yourself in relation to the world. And everybody has a perception of self in the world, whether you understand what that is or not. During the period of the Enlightenment, when you have somebody like Immanuel Kant, now Kant doesn't necessarily believe you have actual real knowledge of the world around you, but he would say that when you're making observations, when you're making rational inquiries, you as a human person have freedom to kind of step outside the world around you and rationally analyze things. And in this kind of rational analysis, you are in some way divorced from the world around you. People refer to this as a kind of God's eye view of reality. This notion that like God, you can kind of approach history in a purely objective way as this kind of disinterested, rational observer. And so in that way, knowledge of the world is knowledge of objects, and we are detached from the objects. We're really like scientists all the time, or observers who just kind of watch and then make conclusions based on, experimentation or observation or, logical connections between this, and this. And this is pure abstract reasoning. That perception of the world makes us in some way kind of gods over the world. It makes us manipulators of the world that is around us. Now, there is an element of that, certainly, that is true, in that God has called man to have dominion over nature. And so there is an otherness between us and nature, such that we stand over nature in some way. Like, nature doesn't have a consciousness of itself. All right. So, a tree doesn't have self-consciousness. So it can't examine itself. I can examine myself, and I can also examine the tree. So there's a kind of distinctness between me and nature in that sense. But at the same time, I'm also part of nature. I'm also a creation. I also participate in divine love, because it is divine love that has created me and created the tree. And we are living in the same beautiful, unified reality that is God, and the love that he has chosen to display outside of himself through the act of creation, and that is maintained through this act of preservation. But if I see myself as this totally isolated object or subject from the world of objects, then I am going to view knowledge in the sense just of this kind of intellectual apprehension and grabbing onto a bunch of abstractified facts that I can stick in my brain, which is a kind of computer. And that's probably a good example and really misunderstands the nature of what the consciousness is and what a computer is when people talk about this. But in a popular perception, you have people talking about computers acting somehow like brains, or that we're going to be able to someday download our consciousness to a machine or something like that, which really gets at this perception of what knowledge is that is completely mistaken. It relies on this perception of the human self and the human mind that we are just gatherers of information. But true knowledge is knowledge of, right? The greater knowledge is not just knowledge in an intellectual apprehension that's part of it, but is an encounter, a knowledge of a thing. And so this is ultimately true, of course, with God. To know God is not simply to know facts about God. And we see this outlined in the New Testament itself, this distinction, where we have, the Pharisees who certainly know the text of Scripture very well, and they're rebuked by Jesus because he said, you think in them, in the Scriptures, you have life, but they testify of me. Like you have knowledge in the sense that you know all the words, but you don't know. You don't have the encounter with the one to whom Scripture points, or the truth to which it points, because he is the truth to which it points. And that's why Jesus says, I am the truth. Right? There's this personalizing of truth. I am the truth. And throughout the New Testament, we have this language of knowledge that's used repeatedly, growing in wisdom and knowledge. Look at the book of Colossians, for example, as Paul counters this sect. He grabs onto this Gnostic conception of growing in knowledge, which to them was knowledge of all of these spiritual entities and orders of angels and all this kind of stuff. And Paul points them toward Christ to say that all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge are found in him, in a person. And so knowledge is through a person, the person of the Son. And that person is love incarnate. And so to grow in knowledge is to grow in love.